Some men mistake silence for weakness. A heavy older man sits at an outdoor cafe in Los Angeles. Black kimono, coffee in hand. A loud real estate mogul walks over with his entourage, knocks the coffee off the table, and slaps the man hard across the face. His friends record it on their phones, laughing. "What are you gonna do, fat man?" The man doesn't flinch. He wipes his cheek, looks the mogul dead in the eyes, and says 5 words. "You have 72 hours. The mogul laughs it off and posts the video online. It goes viral. Millions of views. 2 days of celebration. Then day 3 arrives. Federal agents swarm everything he owns. That quiet man at the cafe was Steven Seagal, and his son runs Homeland Security. But what did Seagal do during those 72 hours? If you enjoyed this, subscribe and stay for what comes next. Now let me tell you how this whole thing started. Because the slap, that wasn't the beginning. That was just the moment everything became irreversible. Victor Hale was the kind of man who needed everyone in the room to know he was the most important person there. He ran a real estate empire across Southern California. High-rise condos, luxury developments, shopping centers with his name carved into the stone above the entrance. He had a reputation for 2 things: making money and making people feel small. His employees feared him. His business partners tolerated him. His wife stayed because leaving meant losing the house in Malibu, the cars, and the lifestyle she had grown used to over 19 years of marriage. Nobody around Victor liked him, but everybody needed something from him. And that gave him power. Or at least it gave him the feeling of power. And for a man like Victor, that was the same thing. Now here's the thing about Victor. He wasn't just arrogant. He was calculated. Every insult he threw, every person he humiliated at a dinner party or a board meeting, it was all done in front of an audience. Because for Victor, cruelty without witnesses didn't count. He needed people to see it. He needed them to laugh. He needed them to be afraid it would happen to them next. That's why he had the entourage. For guys, all of them on his payroll in one way or another. They followed him to restaurants, to clubs, to events. They laughed at his jokes. They recorded his stunts. And they never, not once, told him he was going too far. The day of the slap, Victor had just closed a deal worth $14 million. A mixed-use development in Silver Lake. He was riding high. 3 bottles of champagne at lunch. Loud. Obnoxious. Walking down the street like he owned the sidewalk. That's when he saw the man at the cafe. Now, Victor didn't recognize Steven Seagal right away. What he saw was a large man sitting alone. Older. Heavy. Wearing a black kimono in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles. And to Victor, that was an invitation. Because men like Victor don't see quiet people as peaceful. They see them as targets. He turned to his crew. "Watch this," he said. And they already had their phones out. What Victor didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the man sitting at that table had spent 40 years in martial arts, had trained law enforcement agencies in 3 countries, had worked with foreign governments on security operations most people will never hear about. And more importantly, that man had a son who had built a career not in Hollywood, not in dojos, but in federal law enforcement. A son who had risen quietly and deliberately to one of the most powerful positions in the United States government. But Victor didn't care about any of that. He walked over, knocked the coffee off the table, and delivered the slap heard around the world. And Steven Seagal, he just sat there. He didn't stand up. He didn't grab Victor's wrist. He didn't do any of the things a man with his training could have done in under 2 seconds. He just wiped his face, looked at Victor, and said those 5 words. "You have 72 hours. Victor laughed. His crew laughed. The video was uploaded before they reached the car. Within 6 hours, it had 4 million views. By midnight, it was on every entertainment blog, every gossip site, every late-night comedy segment. Steven Seagal, slapped in public, didn't fight back. The internet called him finished. washed up, a joke. Victor Hale went to bed that night feeling like a king. He had no idea he had just started a clock. And the clock was already running. Day 1 after the slap, Victor woke up to notifications. Hundreds of them. The video had crossed 20 million views. News outlets were picking it up. Entertainment channels were running segments. And every single one of them was laughing at Steven Seagal. Victor loved it. He sat at his kitchen island, scrolling through comments while his assistant brought him a fresh espresso. People were tagging him, calling him a legend, calling Seagal a coward. One comment said, "That fat man in the kimono didn't even stand up." Victor read it out loud to his wife. She didn't laugh. She didn't even look up from her phone. But Victor didn't notice. He was too busy being famous. He reposted the video with a caption. When you slap a so-called action hero and he just sits there. More views, more shares, more interviews. A podcast host called and asked if he wanted to come on and tell the story. Victor said yes before the sentence was finished. Now get this. While Victor was doing press tours about a slap, something very different was happening on the other side of the city. Steven Seagal made one phone call. Just one. It lasted less than 4 minutes. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't ask for revenge. He simply told his son what happened. And then he said 5 words that carried more weight than any punch he ever threw. Someone disrespected me today. That's all it took. His son, Daniel Seagal, had spent 22 years in federal law enforcement. He started as a field agent, worked counterterrorism, ran task forces, and 3 years before this moment, he had been appointed to one of the highest-ranking positions in the Department of Homeland Security. Daniel was not a man who acted on emotion. He was a man who followed evidence. And the thing about men like Victor Hale is that there's always evidence. Within 12 hours of that phone call, Daniel had made calls of his own. Not to hitmen, not to thugs, to accountants, to federal prosecutors, to agents who had been quietly building files on Southern California real estate fraud for years. And one name kept coming up in those files, over and over again. Victor Hale. Believe me, this wasn't a father asking his son to break the law. This was a father reminding his son that a bully had just put himself on camera. And when a man that reckless is willing to assault a stranger in broad daylight for fun, it's usually because he thinks he's untouchable. And men who think they're untouchable always have something to hide. Daniel didn't create a case against Victor. The case already existed. It had been sitting in a queue for months. Understaffed. Underprioritized. One of hundreds. All Daniel did was move it to the top of the pile. And that single act, was the most devastating thing anyone had ever done to Victor Hale. But Victor didn't know any of this yet. Day 2 came and went. The video was still trending but starting to fade. Victor went back to his office, signed a new lease agreement, had lunch at his usual spot, took a call from his accountant about a property in San Diego. Everything was normal. By Tuesday evening, Victor was sitting on his balcony in Malibu with a glass of scotch, watching the sun drop below the Pacific. His phone was quiet. The internet had moved on to the next thing. The slap was old news. He took a long sip and smiled. He thought it was over. Wednesday morning. Day 3. 72 hours exactly. Victor was in his office by 8. He had a meeting at 9 with a developer from Orange County. A normal day. A normal week. He was already forgetting the name of the man he slapped. Then his assistant walked in. Her face was white. She didn't say good morning. She said, "There are people in the lobby. Federal agents. They have a warrant." And just like that, the nature of everything changed. This wasn't about a slap anymore. This wasn't about a viral video or internet fame or a man in a kimono. This was about 20 years of buried paperwork. 20 years of shell companies and forged appraisals and tax returns that didn't match the bank statements. This was the moment Victor's real life caught up with his public one. 12 agents walked into his office. They didn't knock. They had boxes. They had hard drives ready to be pulled. They had a document that was 43 pages long listing every property, every account, every entity connected to Victor Hale's empire. And they started taking everything. Victor called his lawyer. The lawyer didn't pick up. He called again. Voicemail. He called a third time. This time the lawyer answered, but his voice was different. Careful. Measured. Victor, I just got a call from a friend at the U.S. Attorney's Office. This isn't a random audit. This is a coordinated federal investigation. They've been building this for a long time. My advice, don't say a single word to anyone. Victor hung up. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from confusion, because this didn't make sense. He had been operating the same way for 2 decades. The same tricks, the same loopholes, the same people looking the other way. Why now? Why today? He didn't connect it to the slap. Not yet, but the hits kept coming. By noon, agents had reached his home in Malibu. His wife called him screaming. They were in the bedroom. They were in the home office. They were opening the safe. She asked him what he had done, and he didn't have an answer. By 2 o'clock, the news broke. Not the entertainment news this time. Real news. Financial crime reporters. Federal indictment language. A press conference was scheduled for 4 o'clock. Victor's name was mentioned alongside words like fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. The same internet that had celebrated him 3 days ago now turned on him like a dog that smelled blood. His business partner called at 3. I'm out, Victor. I'm pulling everything. Don't contact me again. The line went dead. Then his accountant called. Same message. Different words. I've been subpoenaed. I'm cooperating. You should get a criminal defense attorney. Victor sat alone in his office. The agents had left with 11 boxes of documents and 3 computers. The building was quiet. His assistant had gone home. His phone had stopped ringing because the people who used to call him every day had already decided he was finished. And that's when it hit him. The timing. 3 days. 72 hours. The man at the cafe. The words. You have 72 hours. Victor pulled up the video on his phone. The one he had posted himself. He watched it again. But this time he didn't see a fat man in a kimono. He saw a man who was completely calm. A man who already knew what was coming. A man who didn't need to fight back because the punishment was already arranged. Victor paused the video on the frame where Seagal's eyes met the camera. And for the first time in his adult life, Victor Hale felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. Real fear. He searched Seagal's name. He scrolled past the headlines about the slap, past the memes, past the jokes, and then he found it. A government press release from 3 years earlier. An appointment announcement. Daniel Seagal, Department of Homeland Security, Chief of Operations, reporting directly to the Secretary. Victor dropped his phone on the desk. He didn't say a word. He didn't move. He just stared at the screen and understood, completely and finally, that he had slapped the wrong man. The next 48 hours destroyed what was left. Victor's assets were frozen by Thursday afternoon. Every account, every holding, every offshore trust he thought no one knew about. The IRS had it all. They didn't just know about his money. They knew where it came from. They knew where it went. And they knew whose names he had used to move it. His wife filed for divorce on Friday morning. She didn't call. She didn't argue. She had her attorney send the papers to his lawyer's office, while Victor was sitting in a federal holding room answering questions he had no good answers to. 19 years of marriage. Gone in a manila envelope. By Friday evening, the charges were public. 47 counts. Tax evasion, wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, falsifying business records. The press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office was 2 pages long and read like a biography of everything Victor had ever tried to hide. His name was everywhere again, but not the way it was 3 days ago. 3 days ago, he was the man who slapped a celebrity and got away with it. Now he was the man who was about to lose everything he ever built. And here's the part that got to him the most. Believe me, this is what broke him. Nobody called. Not one person. Not his business partners. Not his golf buddies. Not the guys from his entourage who had stood next to him laughing while he slapped a stranger. Not one of them picked up the phone to check on him. Not one of them offered help. Not one of them said, "Victor, what do you need?" 20 years of relationships, exposed for exactly what they were, transactions. Every friendship he had was built on what he could give people. And the moment he had nothing left to give, those people vanished like they never existed. On Saturday, Victor did something no one expected. He drove to the cafe. The same cafe. He parked across the street and sat in his car for 20 minutes, staring at the table where it happened. The same table. The same chairs. The coffee stain was gone. The world had moved on. But Victor was still sitting in that moment, replaying the slap, hearing the laughter, and seeing those calm, steady eyes looking back at him. He wanted to go inside. He wanted to sit at that table and feel something, understand something, but he couldn't move, because he knew now. He knew that the man he slapped didn't just take it. He absorbed it. And then he made one phone call that set off a chain of events that dismantled a 20-year empire in 72 hours. Seagal didn't need to hit back. He didn't need to make a scene. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone at that cafe. Because Steven Seagal understood something Victor never did. Real power doesn't perform. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a camera. It moves quietly. And by the time you see it coming, it's already too late. Victor sat in that car and cried. Not because he lost his money. Not because his wife left. Not because his friends disappeared. He cried because he finally understood what he was. He was a man who needed to humiliate strangers to feel strong. And the one time he picked the wrong stranger, his entire life fell apart. Not because of the man's fists, because of the man's patience. If this story has kept you here this long, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Because the ending of this one stays with you. That Saturday night, something else happened. Something the news didn't cover. Something Victor didn't find out about until the following week. Steven Seagal sat in his living room with his son Daniel. They didn't talk about the case. They didn't talk about Victor Hale. Daniel brought dinner. They ate quietly. And at the end of the meal, Seagal looked at his son and said, "Thank you." Daniel nodded. That was it. No speeches. No celebration. Just a father and a son who understood each other without needing to say more than 2 words. That quiet dinner. That was the real power. Not the federal agents. Not the frozen accounts. Not the 47 charges. A son who loved his father enough to say, "Nobody does that to you. Not while I'm here." 6 months later, Victor Hale stood in a courtroom in downtown Los Angeles. He was wearing a suit that didn't fit right anymore. He had lost weight. Not the healthy kind. The kind that comes from not sleeping and not eating and spending every waking hour sitting across from lawyers who charge by the minute and never smile. The judge read the charges. All 47 of them. Victor stood with his hands clasped in front of him and said nothing. His criminal defense attorney had told him to say 2 words when asked how he pleaded. Not guilty. He said them. But even he didn't believe them. The trial would take years. His attorneys told him that up front. 2 years minimum. Maybe 3. Maybe longer. And during that time, everything he had would stay frozen. No access to his accounts. No ability to sell property. No income from the empire he spent 2 decades building. He was living in a rented apartment in Burbank paid for by his sister. The same sister he hadn't spoken to in 6 years because he once told her at Thanksgiving that she married beneath her. She took him in anyway. That tells you something about the difference between the 2 of them. Now here's what happened to the video. The original slap video. The one Victor posted himself. It was still online. Still circulating. But the comments had changed. 6 months earlier, the comments were laughing at Seagal. Calling him slow. Calling him finished. Now the comments were different. People were calling Victor a fool. They were writing things like, "He slapped the wrong man and lost everything." And, "Seagal didn't need to fight back. He just made a phone call." The same video. The same slap. But the story around it had completely flipped. The internet didn't feel sorry for Victor. The internet used him as a warning. And Seagal. Where was he in all of this? He was exactly where he had always been. Quiet, private, out of the spotlight. He didn't do interviews about the slap. He didn't post a response. He didn't make a statement. He didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. And that silence, that refusal to perform for the crowd, that was the most powerful thing about him. Some people asked whether what Daniel did was right, whether using a government position to fast-track an investigation against the man who slapped your father crossed a line. And maybe it did. Maybe there's a conversation to be had about that. But here's the thing. The crimes were real. Every single one of the 47 charges was backed by documents, transactions, and witnesses. Victor wasn't framed. He wasn't set up. He was a man who had been breaking the law for 20 years and finally got caught. The only thing Daniel did was make sure someone looked. That's it. He didn't plant evidence. He didn't fabricate charges. He pointed a flashlight into a dark room. And the room was full of rats. Victor knew this too. Deep down, in the part of himself he never showed anyone, he knew the crimes were his. The fraud was his. The lies were his. The slap was his. Every choice that led to this moment was made by him. Freely, with a smile on his face, in front of a camera he turned on himself. That's the part of this story people don't talk about enough. Victor wasn't destroyed by Steven Seagal. He wasn't destroyed by Daniel. He wasn't destroyed by the federal government. He was destroyed by his own arrogance. The slap didn't create the crime. The slap just made sure someone finally cared enough to look. A year later, a reporter tracked down one of Victor's former entourage members, asked him if he regretted being there that day. The man said, "I think about it every single day. I stood there and laughed. And I didn't know we were all watching a man end his own life in 5 seconds." That quote made the rounds online. And it became the final word on the story of Victor Hale. Not every fight is won with fists. Not every punch needs to be thrown. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who sits still, wipes his cheek, and says 5 words. You have 72 hours. Some men mistake silence for weakness. And by the time they learn the truth, it's already too late.